If you're afraid of flying, this account will make you even more nervous. Subscribe to The Story Beyond the Impact and hit the bell so you don't miss any chilling story. You won't believe what happened at 30,000 feet, and I wish I could file it under passenger anecdotes and move on. But I was the lead flight attendant on Flight 318, Boston to Denver, a late departure on a 737-800 with tired carpet, humming CFM 56, and an itinerary that should have been routine. In our pre-flight brief, the captain marked the numbers clean and dry. Cruise FL 350, ride should be good, some light chop over Ohio, souls on board, 160. Any cabin items? I raised one finger. Row 13, I said. Seat 13F is blocked. Maintenance sticker under the seat pan. Broken seatbelt tongue, and the life vest compartment was flagged. Ops marked it, do not assign. I'm used to these little oddities. Airplanes are like old apartment buildings. Something creaks, something sticks, and you keep going. Still, I circled 13F on my copy of the cabin plan like I always do when a seat is out of service. Right side of the cabin, window seat, aft of the wing. The kind of seat that makes you feel like you're peeking into the engine's ribcage when the flaps move. Boarding went smooth, the typical choreography of roller bags, apologies, and elbows. I stood at 2L counting clicks of the overhead bins, while my team, Luis and Priya, ran baggage Tetris. When the last gate-checked stroller disappeared down the jet bridge, I did the count. 159. I walked the aisle again to reconcile. Our manifest still said 160 souls, but that includes crew, jump-seaters, and infants in arms. Numbers matched. I initialed my line, stowed the iPad, and closed the door with the satisfying thunk that always feels like the opening note of a symphony. Pushback, beacon on. We rolled, we roared, we climbed. The fasten seatbelt sign glowed steady amber above heads bowed to phones. I did the silent demo with muscle memory. Seatbelt, oxygen mask, life vest. Priests of a ritual no one listens to until the boat is actually sinking. At 12,000 feet, the cabin settled into the low, pressurized hush that makes your ears feel like your thoughts are wrapped in cotton. I started my first pass, checking latches and tray tables, while the captain pinged us on the interphone. Cruise in 20. Ride reports are good. My cart clicked forward. Coffee carafe, decaf packet, the smell of powdered cream and burnt hope. That's when the first chime sounded. A single note, neutral and bright. A call light. I glanced up at the ceiling panel. The blue halo winked to life halfway down the right aisle. 13F. I can hear your objection. But you just said 13F was empty. I did. That's why I looked at Luis, then at the panel again. He mouthed, glitch. I parked the cart in the galley, engaged the brake so it wouldn't roll backward, and walked the aisle with that strange smile we wear when something's off, but you don't want to show it. When I reached row 13, the light was still on. The shade at 13F was halfway down, the plastic handle tilted like a half-closed eyelid. The seat cushion was smooth, the belt ends lying exactly where maintenance had taped them together with a red I know P flag. A safety card sat in the pocket, crisp and new among dog-eared magazines. Sir? I said reflexively, then felt foolish for addressing an empty seat. The window was black, the kind of featureless graphite that reflects the cabin back at you. Sometimes you catch your own movement in it and startle. Sometimes it's only your brain filling in a face. Only this time, something in the glass didn't move when I did. A jawline. That's what I saw first. The pale geometry of a jawline and the arch of a brow, a man's profile turned toward the wing. I shifted to make the reflection align with my own head. It didn't. I leaned closer, close enough to fog the plexiglass with my breath, and the chill of the window bled into my skin like winter. The interphone buzzed at my hip. I jolted, straightened, and answered. Forward galley. Priya's voice came in a whisper that carried the static of the ceiling speakers. ACAR's message just printed in the flight deck, she said. Dispatch wants a reconfirmation. Verify souls on board 161. Captain says our numbers are off by 1. We boarded 159 plus 3 crew, I said, eyes still on the stubborn blue halo above 13F. Where'd they get 161? That's why he called. He wants your cabin count again. The light at 13F blinked off. The blue halo died like someone had closed their eyes. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Copy, I told Priya. I'll recount. I turned to step away and heard fabric, a whisper of it. The sound of a sleeve brushing armrest vinyl. My body answered before my mind did. I looked down, and the seatbelt ends at 13F were no longer lying flat. They arched toward each other under a thin tension, hovering an inch above the cushion, like hands that wanted to meet. I blinked hard. Turbulence can make belts slither. Airflow does odd things under a recirculation nozzle. I reached in, touched the metal tongue, and it was cold enough to sting. I laid both ends flat again, no tremor in the floor, no vibration through the seat tracks, just my own pulse skipping behind my ear. Back in the galley, I thumbed the interphone to the flight deck. Cabin to cockpit. Our count is still 160 total, including crew. Confirm no jump seater added. The captain came on, voice steady, the kind that makes passengers trust steel at altitude. Copy 160, he said. We'll tell dispatch their printout is wrong. Let us know if you see anything unusual. I thought about telling him the call light had come from a dead seat. I thought about describing a jawline in a window that didn't obey my movement. Instead, I said all normal and hung up because there's a rhythm to flights and you don't throw a rock at the metronome unless you have to. The service resumed. The cart squeaked. Water cups stacked. Coffee poured. The familiar script of cream or sugar. Somewhere over Albany, the ride settled velvet smooth, the seatbelt sign clicked off, and a baby finally slept. I passed row 13 again, slowing without meaning to. No light, no reflection, only the faint smell of cold, like a walk-in freezer when the door first opens. And yet, as we leveled at FL 350 and the cabin dimmed to that violet dusk airlines love, a second chime rang out, polite as a doorbell. This time it wasn't a single seat. The call light panel blinked 13F twice, ding-dong, and then for a heartbeat, every blue light down the right side of the cabin flickered in unison, as if the airplane were taking a cold breath and exhaling frost into the wiring. Louise, I called softly. He was already looking up, face lit blue. I'll check the PSU, he said, meaning the passenger service unit above 13F. Maybe a short. Careful, I said. And I wished I hadn't, because careful of what? He reached the row, popped the PSU latch with a practiced thumb, and the smell hit us both. Not smoke, not hot plastic. Something like old raincoats and basement concrete, the smell of places where water has stood a long time with no sun to dry it. Luis looked back at me. Do you smell? The airplane shivered. Not turbulence, more like a muscular shrug through the fuselage. The cartwheels clucked once in their locks. A child giggled and then stopped, as if told to by someone they trusted. The ceiling panel steadied. The call lights went dark, and over the PA, without the double chime that should precede it, a voice whispered in a dry paper rasp. Meal preference for 13F. Window, please. The PA cut out. The captain hadn't touched it. None of us had. And in the frozen beat that followed, the temperature in row 13 fell 5 degrees, enough for my skin to pebble like I'd stepped into shadow. I touched my name pin to remind myself I was real, breathed, and began my checklist again from the top, because routine is a rope you can hold when the cabin goes black. The second time I saw him, I promised myself I'd file an irregularity report. The first time could have been my brain assigning a face to the void beyond a double-pane 737 window. The second time took away the alibi. We were west of Buffalo, the captain had called for light chop, and the cabin had settled into the soft chaos of snack wrappers and whispered conversations. I was midway through garbage collection when 13F chimed again. Not a stutter, not a flicker, a deliberate ding-dong, as if a finger pressed and released. Priya, I said into the interphone. Keep an eye on the aft galley. I'm checking 13F. I'm coming with you, she said, already on her feet. We walked the right aisle together, an inch to the left of center so we could glance into the row without being obvious. 13D and 13E held a married couple who'd switched their reading lights into perfect synchronicity. They both looked up as we slowed. "Everything all right?" the man asked. "Routine check," I smiled. "How's the ride?" "Smooth," he said, then flicked his eyes to the window beside him and back to me in a way that read, "Do you see that too?" I leaned, casual, and let my gaze find 13F's window. No shade movement, no glare from a phone, no glistening patch of moon. Only the cabin's violet reflection, and in it, the insistence of a face turned toward the wing, high cheekbones, a nose that would have been noble if it weren't pressed to the glass. His lips didn't move, his eyes did not blink. He was a negative image of a man, like the film ghost you get when two exposures overlap. "Sir," I said, and I hate that I said it like I was waking someone from a nap, "you can't occupy that seat. It's out of service." Both 13D and 13E followed my eyes to the empty cushion. The woman's voice dropped. "Is this a prank?" "No, ma'am," I said, just a reflection that doesn't map to a head. Just a call light that rings from a seat with the belt taped inoperative. Just a smell of wet concrete bleeding from a sealed ceiling panel. Just a system issue. We'll fix the light." I stepped into the row. The air cooled, a peculiar local cold that thinned the smell of coffee and warmed plastic, until I felt like I was standing in the doorway of a walk-in freezer. The hairs on my forearm rose. I reached toward the window to push the shade fully down and end the Rorschach test. The face didn't distort when my hand broke the reflection. That was the moment my professional composure split like thin ice. It should have warped. It should have dissolved into my own face stretched across the plexiglass. It did not. It leaned, not much, just a degree, as if the head had pivoted to register the intrusion of my hand. I smelled something like rain on overheated tarmac. The belt ends, those taped, tagged, absolutely useless belt ends, trembled like violin strings after a pluck. I dropped the shade. The cabin's violet drowned the window into uniform dark. Priya's fingers closed around my elbow with a strength that said we both saw that. The married couple looked at me the way people look at a doctor when they're trying not to hear bad news in a waiting room. "Cabin to cockpit," I whispered into the interphone as we backed away. "We need you." "Go ahead," the captain said. "Dispatch keeps printing 161. We keep counting 160. Also," I hesitated, "you don't say ghosts on the interphone. You don't say faces in the glass. We've got repeated call lights from a blocked seat and bleed air cold spots localized to one window. The PA transmitted uncommanded once." Silence. Then the first officer came on. His tone was light, almost joking, which is how pilots tell you they're listening while keeping the airplane an island of reason. "We're seeing some oddities too. TCI has picked a traffic target dead abeam at our altitude and speed, then dropped it. No transponder code, no visual on the scope. Could be a spurious return. Keep me posted." "Copy," I said. My mouth was dry. "Copy. We resume the dance of normalcy. That's how you do it. Smile, check belts, assure, serve. The rhythm carries the cabin. The minute you stop, panic breeds." Half an hour later, I tried something I hadn't done before. I brought the cart back to row 13, parked it with an easy grin, and said to the couple, "Complimentary warm cookies." They laughed and took them. I turned slightly, aligning my body to shield the empty 13F, and slid a napkin onto the vacant tray table. With my other hand, under the edge of the napkin, I placed a single sealed Biscoff packet on the cushion. A ritual, an offering, or maybe a test. "If we can get you anything else," I said, "just ring." I tapped the call button above deliberately to show them how it worked. Ding dong. The blue halo lit. It felt like pushing a doorbell on an abandoned house. I pushed the cart 2 rows up, pretended to talk to a teenager about headphones, and glanced back. The napkin fluttered, the way napkins do in climate-control eddies. The Biscoff lay where I'd put it. Then the airplane shrugged again. Not the bounce of chop, not the yaw of a bank, a shrug like a creature with metal bones settling its shoulders. The napkin slid an inch toward the window. The Biscoff rotated 30 degrees clockwise, as if nudged by a fingertip that existed only for that gesture and nothing else. The married couple saw it. Their eyes went wide and sideways. He began to reach, then stopped. And in the space between impulse and restraint, I heard something through the PA that wasn't a human voice at all. A low, layered choir of air, engine sound, yes, but wrong, not harmonizing with itself. Like wind recorded and played backward. It threaded through the cabin speakers for less than a second, then vanished. The aft lavatory's occupied sign flickered, in-op, then on, then off. Someone pressed the flush, and it roared like a storm. Luis stepped into the aisle, pointed subtly at the overhead above 13F. Panels latched, he mouthed, but there's condensation on the inside. He mimed a wipe. It fogged. Condensation inside a sealed PSU isn't standard, but HVAC does strange things under pack flow changes. That's what I told myself as I slid the napkin back, reclaimed the Biscoff, and felt under my palm the faintest impression of cold, as if someone had been sitting there a long time. "Mom?" The woman in 13E had the fragile voice people use when their worldview has stepped a fraction out of true. "Is there a passenger assigned to this seat?" "No," I said softly. "There isn't, but someone keeps ringing." "I know." I smiled the way you smile at a friend who can't stop looking over their shoulder in a dark hallway. "We're taking care of it." That's when the interphone jangled again, a tone the passengers don't hear. I lifted it. "Lead. Dispatch on SATCOM," the captain said. "They're asking again. Souls on board 161. They're transmitting a seat map snapshot from the gate scanners and claiming someone boarded after final call and didn't scan out. Name attached." He stopped. "It's blank. No name." I felt the cabin's pressure not in my ears but against my heart. "I'll do a full head count, row by row." "Thanks," he said. "And, we'll cycle the PA panel." We saw a transmit light flicker a minute ago, without input. I took a breath and switched to my firmest voice, the one that can move a crowd without raising itself. "Team," I said to Luis and Priya, "we are going to do a second head count for operational reasons. Keep it calm, no mention of row 13. Smile, count lips moving. If anyone asks, tell them we're double-checking for meal inventory." We walked the cabin in opposite directions, little pencils tapping tally marks on cards we've used for years. People love to be counted when you make it feel official. They sit straighter, they exist more loudly, they anchor the airplane with their presence. By the time we met at row 20, our totals matched. 157 passengers, 3 crew. 160, no infants in arms, no jump-seater. No one asleep so deeply they hid in a number, and still, when I looked up at the ceiling panel because I couldn't stop myself, 13F pulsed once, like a heartbeat under the skin of the airplane. I stared at it until my eyes watered. The blue halo went dark. I let out a breath, and for a second, I believed we had reset whatever was wrong. Then, from the forward galley, the coffee maker cycled by itself. Heating element on, a hiss like breath drawn through teeth. The pot filled an inch with inky liquid no one had poured. "Who started a brew?" I called. No one answered. The aft galley ovens clicked as their fans spun and stopped. The cabin lights along the starboard side dimmed half a step, then returned, as if someone had passed between a lamp and a wall. I walked back to row 13 with the feigned ease of a hostess checking on early drinkers at a party. I stopped beside 13F and placed my hand, palm down, on the cushion. The cold came up through the fabric into my bones. "Meal preference for 13F, the PA whispered again. The consonants sanded down to almost nothing. "Window, please." I didn't push the call button. I didn't touch the shade. I only said, as evenly as I could, "We see you." The airplane seemed to exhale. The cold eased 1 degree. Somewhere behind me, a child started humming a tune she couldn't possibly know, a musical phrase from the safety video. But backward, we held altitude. The engines droned. The seatbelt sign stayed off. Every measure of normality glowed steady and comforting, while we tried not to look at the part of the cabin that had begun to remember a passenger. The manifest did not. What would you say over the PA if a single call light kept chiming from a seat that's officially empty? Acknowledge it, or keep the cabin calm and quiet? Tell me your answer in the comments and why. You learn early that airplanes have their own grammar. Lights mean things. Chimes mean things. Cold air out of nowhere usually means a pack change or trim air hiccup, not a presence choosing a seat. So I did what good crew do when something gets uncanny. I wrapped it in procedure until it looked like work. I started with the FAP, the flight attendant panel on the forward bulkhead. It's a plain matrix of buttons and membrane switches, but it's a kind of chapel for us. Cabin lights, emergency lights, temperature requests. I tapped call reset. Every blue halo winked out, except 13F, which pulsed once after the sweep like the ripple that follows a stone in a pond. Copy, I said to myself, because narrating makes things less likely to eat you. Local reset did not clear. Want me to kill starboard reading lights for a second? Luis asked from the aft galley. He had the pagey tone that says he's joking to keep the universe casual. Negative, I said. Let's not punish the whole side. I paged the flight deck. Lead to cockpit. Go for cockpit, the first officer answered. FAP reset successful cabin-wide except one seat. We're getting persistent call chimes from 13F. The panel above that row is cold to the touch, and we've had a localized PA whisper without a chime. Copy, he said. We just cycled the PA on our end. The transmit light stopped its flirtation. Also, we've got a good cabin altitude and both packs steady. He paused. We did see a little wander in the CPC last minute. Outflow valve traced 5% open to closed and back, like the airplane side. Nothing outside normal. Understood, I said. I'll relocate the adjacent passengers under the pretense of a PSU check. I built a smile and took it down the aisle. Hi, folks, I said to the couple in 13DE. I'm so sorry, but maintenance flagged the panel above your row and wants us to run a quick test. Would you mind relocating to row 6? Free drinks for the inconvenience? The man didn't argue. The woman didn't either. They moved with the grateful relief of people excused from a room they'd started to dislike. As soon as they stood, the temperature at 13F dipped another notch, sharp enough that my breath barely showed when I exhaled, as if the SPI, smoke heat detector above us, had opened a secret hatch to winter. I slid into 13D, elbows in, forearms on my knees, facing the window. The INOP flag on the belt ends at 13F brushed my leg like a shy animal. The taped tongue looked like an excuse instead of a fact. I told myself 100 reasons belts move without hands. Air currents, cabin vibrations, the natural flex of a pressurized shell going a little more oval than round. I stood, reached up to the PSU latch, and popped the panel. It hinged down obediently, exposing reading light housings, the attendant call switch wiring, the oxygen mask door. A bead of moisture trembled on the inside, fat as a tear. It shouldn't have been there. The panel is inside the cabin envelope. Condensation lives on the other side of the acrylic. I wiped it with my index finger, and it left a clean trail through the fog like a signature. Luis, I said, bring me an oxygen tool. On newer birds, we get keys. On ours, the oxygen door can be persuaded with a narrow plastic blade. He handed it to me, and I slid it into the slot. The door didn't click. It relented. A single mask dropped out and swung in the still air. No green flow indicator because the lanyard had not been pulled. No hiss of oxygen because nobody was breathing. And yet, the mask rotated toward the empty seat as if watching me. The elastic serpenting once like someone's hand had brushed it on the way down. I felt the old school part of me rise, the part trained to scold nonsense with a checklist. We do not play with passenger oxygen, even for ghosts, I told myself, and guided the mask back into its cradle. The door didn't seat properly. I pressed until it latched. It unlatching itself again would be a write-up. I'd file the C-Type 20 Finder something later with maintenance. "Captain," I said on the interphone, "we've got an oxygen mask door that's tempted to deploy an unexplained moisture in the PSU. I've moved the adjacent passengers." "Appreciate it," he said. "Dispatch is still pestering ACARS with 161. We fed them our count again. I'm logging a cabin irregularity for maintenance on arrival. Copy." I hung up and looked at the window. The shade was down. The reflex I'm supposed to have, the show them it's nothing reflex, told me to open it. I did. Outside was black as always, the wing light a wedge of weak silver on the flaps. The engine spinner wore its dull chevron like a hypnotist's coin. And in the glass, not outside, in the glass, there was the faintest outline of a man's profile, exactly where a face would be if 13F were occupied. High cheekbone, dark slick of hair, a nose that would look kind if it weren't pressed so close the bridge blurred. "You can't sit there," I said under my breath. "You've been deferred." The PA breathed in my ear without the courtesy of a chime. "Meal preference for 13F, window please." It wasn't malicious. It was bureaucratic, like a message caught in a loop that had learned a new language but only one phrase. "Do you want the shade up?" I asked the glass. I felt ridiculous. I also felt that if I ignored it, it would sulk in larger ways. The shade didn't move. I pushed it up halfway, and the temperature under my hands eased from walk-in freezer to chilled museum. Frost blossomed in the lower corner of the pane, a fern of ice that wrote and unwrote itself. Letters formed, failed, tried again, like fingertips sketching on condensation. F, the stroke faltered. W, the ice sighed. Ow. 3 letters. Ow. "Window," I said aloud. The frost held the word for a 2 count, and then, absurdly, added "please." But it broke the P into a melting R and the S into a shape like a 5. I felt like crying, not from fear, but from the stranger emotion that rises when something that shouldn't have any want shows you one anyway. I lifted the shade fully. The cold remained, but it didn't cut. The oxygen door stayed latched. The mask hung obedient inside. The blue 13F halo went dark. I let myself breathe. "Thank you," I whispered. I didn't mean it to be reverent. It was. I slid back into the aisle and signaled to Priya. "Keep row 13 empty for now. Tell anyone who asks, we're drying a panel." We ran a water service and pretended nothing about our world had bent. People thanked us for the cookie program like we'd invented it. The girl who'd hummed backward now hummed forward, and I stopped myself from deciding what that meant. The ride stayed smooth in the meteorological way. In the other way, the way where the airplane's body felt newly inhabited, it was busier. The aft lavatory engaged light, clicked to on, and stayed that way while the door stood open. The galley ovens cycled their fans in a pattern that didn't match any warming profile we use. A soft whir, whir, whir like breath. The coffee maker filled its carafe to the same inch mark again, with no one loading a pouch. When I touched the pot with the back of my hand, the glass was cold. I took the pot to the trash cart and poured the liquid out. It wasn't coffee. It was the color of weak tea and smelled like rain on aluminum. It slid across the trash bag and disappeared with a sound that didn't splash so much as withdraw. "Tell me you saw that," I said. "I'm not paid to interpret liquids," Priya said without looking at it, which was a very good answer. Another ding-dong. 13F glowed once. Not urgent, not needy, just a touchstone. "I'm still here." "How far to top of descent?" I asked the flight deck. 2 hours, the captain said. "We'll cross the front range on the minor side of a jet streak, maybe light chop. You good back there?" "Yes," I lied politely, which is one of the ways you keep a cabin upright. "We've stabilized a seat issue." "We saw that too," he said. "TCAS threw a ghost returner beam starboard earlier, then dropped it. I'm chalking it up to gremlins." "Roger, gremlins," I said, and we both pretended we'd made a joke. I went back to 13F and slid a new napkin onto the tray, smoother this time so the fibers wouldn't flutter with the climate control. I set a small paper cup of water there, sealed with a lid. "This is yours if you want it," I said, just loud enough to be talking and not mad. Shades up, window preference honored. The airplane answered in the minuscular, seat track ticking once, a tiny contraction of aluminum when temperature shifts. The water in the cup developed a skin of microbubbles that clung to the rim. Then the seatbelt tongue at 13F, the taped, tagged, broken tongue, lifted a centimeter and plinked back down on the cushion like a coin surrendering to gravity. I closed my eyes, opened them, and did something that felt blasphemous and right at the same time. I leaned in and said, "If you say anything else on the PA, say it quietly. I'll hear you." The PA stayed mercifully dead. The call light stayed dark. And for the first time, since the door thunked shut in Boston, the metal bones of the airplane felt like they'd accepted a passenger no one could invoice. In a seat maintenance had sworn off, under a window someone insisted on. Things held until Ohio's western border, and then the airplane learned a new word. We were midway through trash pickup when the seatbelt sign came on by itself. We all looked up because we all know the cadence of the chime when the captain hits it, and this wasn't it. There was no dual tone, just the amber man pinned by a cartoon belt, lighting up aisle after aisle like a line of tiny altars. I thumbed the interphone. "Captain, seatbelt sign just came on." "Negative," he said instantly. "We didn't touch it." Then after a beat, "We just got a master caution for Elec and it cleared itself. No messages to chase. Might be a nuisance. I'll cycle the sign on my panel and see if we own it again." The sign blinked off, then on with the correct chime. Passengers did the obedient shuffle of tightening loosest belts. I passed 13F and felt the air turn refrigerator cold in a one-seat radius again, like a sphere of winter moving with the idea of a man. "Window," the PA breathed directly into my ear with no preamble. Not a page, not even a whisper, a breath. "Please." It already was open. I resisted the idea of explaining that to what? A line item? A lagging imprint? I slid my hand to the shade anyway and nudged it the 1 degree it might need to feel obeyed. Outside, the wing lights showed the skin of the airplane wearing its tiny rivet moons as usual. The world was clear. The ride was velvet. Then the TCAS bellowed in the flight deck, muffled through the door, but unmistakable all the way to the aft galley. "Traffic. Traffic." Heads lifted along the cabin because that voice cuts through movies and dreams. The call stopped as quickly as it came. The first officer came on the PA with the avuncular calm of a surgeon whose patient just twitched under anesthesia. "Folks, we had a momentary traffic advisory that cleared. Nothing to see out the windows. Keep those belts fastened while you're seated. We're in good air." I looked out the window anyway. Habit. Hope. I saw nothing but the wing. And then, layered over the wing like a film cell that hadn't advanced, I saw the suggestion of another wing, slightly lower, out of alignment, not out there, in the glass. "Echo flight," I said before I could stop myself. The word felt right. The man in 13F wasn't a person seeking service. He was a copy of a copy, a return pulse that had learned to ask for only one thing, a window on his own reflection. I tested a thought. I reached into the seat pocket with 2 fingers and brought up the safety card. New, crisp, its corners still willing to cut skin. I set it on the tray. I laid a golf pencil beside it, the kind we use for customs forms. "If you can write," I said, "give me a name." Then, before fear could put a tremble in my voice, "You're scaring my passengers. I won't let you do that, but if you tell me what you need, I'll be fair." The airplane breathed, the outflow valve tracing again in a slow whoo that only those of us who live in cabins recognize. The pencil rolled an 8th turn and stopped right before the card edge, like it had found a lip to rest against. No letters appeared. Of course they didn't. What did happen was so small, I might have missed it if I had blinked. The water cup on the tray grew a meniscus that leaned, not sloshed, not spilled, leaned toward the window. A polite bow. "I'm getting the sense," I said softly. that you don't want us to block you. The call chime at 13F went ding once. Single note, no halo. A yes you might miss if you were new at this work. Captain, I said on the interphone, can I request we avoid leaning passengers over row 13? We've stabilized an human factors issue by keeping the shade up. A beat, and then the first officer, we approve any cabin action that keeps the humans from becoming factors. Thank you, I said, and we all pretended we were only being witty. We resumed like that for 30 minutes. Belts on, ride smooth, movie glow, hushed talk. A baby hiccuped instead of crying. Priya did a walkthrough with her compassion turned up to 11. Luis folded napkins the way he does when he's trying not to count dead people he's never met. The cabin had the feeling it sometimes gets at night when everyone agrees not to wake the plane. And then, because it wasn't going to let me have peace for free, the aft right door proximity light flickered unlocked on the FAP for a pulse and went dark. The door itself was sealed. The handle had not moved, but the airplane had imagined an opening. Captain, I said, we saw a 2-hour proximity blink. We didn't, he said, eyes clearly on a different blip, but we just got a SATCOM text from dispatch asking, and I quote, has seat 13F been reactivated? I stared at the FAP. We don't activate seats. They sent a seat map snapshot, he said, voice tight for the first time. Their software draws a blue dot over occupied seats. Sometimes it sticks if somebody changes seats after boarding. We're staring at a blue dot at 13F. We've got no human in that seat, I said, the shape of the truth scraping my throat on the way out. And yet, I told them mismatch, he said. We're not diverting for a glitch. Copy, I said, and in that instant the oxygen mask door I had forced shut above 13F decided it had run out of pretending. It popped open with a tidy click, and the single mask fell again, hung still, then swiveled. It didn't swing in the air the way weighted masks do when the cabin moves. It turned as if to face a profile that hadn't bothered to warm the cushion it occupied. I didn't touch it this time. I felt like I would be interrupting someone's prayer. The coffee maker pinged done. No one had loaded it. I glanced in on principle. The pot now held an inch of water again, but it was clear as bottled and beaded with the same micro bubbles I'd seen in the cup at 13F. When I set my palm to the glass, it was neither hot nor cold. It had an absence of temperature like metal in deep shadow. I poured it out, again, and watched it vanish down a drain that seemed too small to accept it. Then I did the most normal thing I could think of. I took the interphone and made a cabin announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, I said in my best honest voice, we've turned on the seatbelt sign for a period of light chop. Please return to your seats and fasten your belts. Keep your shade position as you like it, but do me a favor. Try not to lean into your neighbor's windows. We'll start our second service shortly. A hand shot up in row 10. A girl asked, can I switch seats to an empty window? Not row 13, I said before my brain could pretty the words. Everywhere else, you're good. She laughed because it sounded like a joke when said by a confident adult on a line flight. She moved to row 11 and became one more anchor. Halfway through the next pass, 13F chimed again. 2 notes this time, a doorbell to nobody's door. The blue halo lit and stayed, a steady attention. I looked up to the FAP and watched the starboard cabin lights dim a fraction, like an old theater gasping at a curtain call. Okay, I said to the empty seat. If you need a witness, I'm here. I sat in 13E and angled my body toward the window. The shade was fully open. The night was an abyss pressed flat against a sandwich of glass and technology. For a full minute, nothing happened. People behind me murmured. An ice clattered in a cup. The engine hummed the vowel of a long road. Then the reflection in the window moved independent of my own again. And this time it turned enough that I could see the eye. Not a hole, not a blank. An eye, focused somewhere past the wing. It did not blink. It did not flinch. It was as calm as a man in a train window, watching a landscape he's crossed so often he can't be surprised. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking through. The TCS muttered again in the cockpit, too soft for passengers, loud enough for my crew ears. Monitor vertical speed. I felt a microscopic sag in my stomach as the autopilot trimmed, then eased us back up. The airplane felt like it was trying to share a sky with something that wasn't there. Echo flight, I breathed. Where did you land? The PA inhaled. Meal preference for 13F. A pause, and this time the word window came out clipped and clear, as if whatever was speaking had finally found its consonants. I raised the safety card again, laid it flat, and set the pencil across the bottom like an underline. If you need the shade, it stays up, I said. I can do that. But if you want more than that, tell me what you lost. The frost on the window tried again. It traced Den in 3 unsteady strokes, then blurred into nothing as the cabin's breathing warmed the pain. Denver, I said. We'll get you there. I don't know why I promised. You promised children things, and grieving people, and planes. It felt like the right liturgy in a church made of aluminum and physics. The blue 13F halo went dark for good measure, as if in thanks. Captain, I said on the secure interphone, our passenger wants Denver. And he wants the shade up. The captain didn't laugh. He didn't tell me to see the company doctor after release. He said, Roger, we're going to make a gentle descent. Keep an eye on row 13 in case the oxygen decides to argue. We'll brief ATC for a quiet arrival. Yes, sir, I said, and the airplane seemed to put its shoulders back as if it had been given something it could do. Fly. For the hour that followed, the cabin and I kept a truce with a seat no one occupied. I left the water on the tray. I checked the oxygen mask once and let it hang rather than force it into a door that did not consent. The child's humming became a lullaby. Priya wrote an irregularity report title and left the body blank, as if the right words might arrive like ACAR's text. Just before top of descent, 13F pinged me one last time. Ding dong. I glanced up and found no blue light. The sound had come from inside my interphone, a tiny private doorbell meant only for crew. I lifted the handset and waited. No voice, only the sound of air moving in a place air is not supposed to move. The ENE bay beneath the cockpit, where the airplane's brain sleeps. A low shuffle, like a man in an aisle stretching before deplaning. Window acknowledged, I said, because ritual is life on metal wings. We'll make sure you see the city. The seatbelt sign flicked on with the right chime this time. The captain's voice filled the cabin with measured comfort. Folks, we're starting our descent into Denver. Beautiful night, clear skies. From all of us, thanks for flying with us this evening. Nobody screamed. Nobody saw a monster. Nobody but me and my crew and a couple in 13DE understood that an airplane had remembered someone. Had carried his insistence like a line of code that wouldn't compile until the right request passed through a very old window. And as the Rockies rose out of the dark and the altimeter wound down, 13F stayed cold, obedient, and open-eyed any time I looked. The closer we got to the city, the more that cold felt less like winter and more like the air a person breathes before they say goodbye. ATC gave us the first vector like a hand on the shoulder, subtle, guiding. You won't believe how civilized the end of a night flight can feel. A cabin that smells like warm plastic and mint gum, screens dimmed, heads tilted, the engine note thinning as the auto throttle trims for a descent you barely feel. The captain pinged us. Top of descent in 5. We'll keep it smooth. I looked down the right aisle. 13F waited like a question mark drawn in frost. Procedure is the rope you hold when the floor feels like it might shift. I started the landing dance early. Cart stowed, latches checked, galley switches off. Priya ran a trash sweep with that smile that calms babies and businessmen equally. Luis did a quiet walkthrough, eyes hunting for belts that needed nudging and seats that needed a yes from gravity. When he got to row 13, he didn't pretend he wasn't listening. None of us did. The first chime for 10,000 feet came in with the pressurization's soft sigh. The seatbelt sign, properly this time, lit with the captain's signature double chime. My PA voice had its practiced candor. Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our descent into Denver. Please return to your seats, fasten seatbelts low and tight, and ensure window shades are in the position you prefer for landing. My eyes went to the shade at 13F, like they were pulled by magnet. It was up. The cold around that cushion was the crisp of grocery store freezers, not the bite of deep winter, a boundary you could tolerate if you believed in reasons. The oxygen mask still hung, canted slightly toward the glass, as if to keep company. Cars chattered in the cockpit. The captain called us again, his tone steady but edged with the math of a man carrying one extra variable. "Dispatch wants us to confirm a special service for seat 13F on arrival," he said. "Wheelchair request from gate. No name attached." I told them our manifest doesn't show an occupant. I pressed the interphone hard enough to leave a print. "Do not send anyone down the jet bridge expecting a person," I said, before I could rearrange the sentence into something corporate. "You'll spook the ramp." He breathed out a short laugh that meant we're already spooked. "Copy. We'll clean it up on blocks." We crossed through 18,000 feet. You can feel the airplane shift its ideas about altitude when the altimeters set local. The cabin lights along the starboard ceiling dimmed a notch and returned, like a theater testing its curtain call. The FAP burped a single blink at 2R procs unlocked and then forgot. I patted the door seal with my palm, the way a person pats a dog that just dreamed itself into a growl. "Cabin ready in 10, I told the flight deck. The first officer's voice in my ear came back warm. "We're on vectors east of the field. Expect right traffic. Crosswind light. We'll keep it simple. If row 13 has preferences, honor them." That's what he said. Not if this glitch persists. Not if the thing you won't name keeps misbehaving. If row 13 had preferences. I loved him a little for that. I slid into 13E again, knees turned toward the aisle, body angled so the rest of the cabin felt served and not studied. The window was a slab of night poured to the brim. The wing light cut a chalk line along the flaps, and the rivets glowed like a constellation you only see from metal rooms. In the reflection, there was a profile, calm as a man on a commuter train who knows every pole between stations. He did not look at me. He looked through. "Here's your Denver brief," I said softly, as if I were telling it to a nervous passenger. "We'll hit a couple step-downs, turn base south of downtown, join final, smooth air, shade up for the view. We'll keep you by the window." The call button at 13F chimed once. No blue halo, only the bell, and my skin stippled. It felt like a yes. We started securing the cabin properly. I caught a man in 21B sneaking his tray down and gave him that gentle, "we both know better" smile. Priya coaxed a shoe out of the aisle with a knuckle. Luis checked lavlocks and saw the aft occupied sign flicker inop and then recover. The ovens cycled their fans for no reason and then stopped like someone shushed them. The coffee maker, poor haunted thing, pulsed once without heating and then sat still, empty, as if it had learned not to pour rain into its own glass. Through 12,000, the airplane breathed in the particular way of a long descent, packs adjusting, CPC tracing the outflow valve in slow motion. I touched the cushion at 13F. The cold was precise now, an edge like a metal ruler laid on cloth. The seatbelt tongue, taped and tagged, twitched as the airplane trimmed, an insect trying to remember flying. A girl in row 11 leaned into her window. The reflections stuttered. For a pulse, there were two wings laid over one another in the glass, ours and a second a finger width lower. It was like looking at a double exposure. The TCAS didn't bark this time. Maybe the device had learned whatever the window knew and elected to keep quiet. "Echo flight," I said under my breath, borrowing the phrase because it fit. "You still with us?" A whisper traced the PA without chime, a breath on paper. "Window." "We're keeping it up," I said. "You'll see the lights." At 10,000, the overhead bins stopped creaking and started listening. I know that's not a real thing. But the silence that happens when a plane gets serious near an airport, it's a flavor. People feel it. They tuck their elbows. They tuck their thoughts. The cabin becomes an organism that has decided to land. I began the final cabin check. Hands on seatbacks, belts snugged, latches closed. Row 13 I left for last. When I reached it, I did something that wasn't in any manual. I leaned close to the glass and spoke as if to a child sitting very still in a waiting room. "If you need to stand," I said, "don't. Wait until we're at the gate." The frost in the lower corner tried at letters again. St. A smear. That looked like a ladder. And then nothing. The cabin air warmed the attempt back into plain glass. It didn't matter. I felt understood. Maybe that was only my own need to be useful. Maybe that's what keeps crews sane. The fiction that we can talk a situation down like we can talk a person down. "Cabin ready," I told the cockpit, voice clear now, the weight of ritual steadier than fear. "Appreciate it," the captain said. "Flaps coming to 5. We're on a downwind leg. Expect 20 minutes to gate." I strapped into my jump seat and watched the cabin own its quiet. 13F stayed as it wanted. Window open, belt ends like two thoughts that never meet, oxygen mask politely turned toward the view. I braced my boots on the metal bar and felt the airplane shift its shoulders for work. We turned base. The city came into view like a necklace spilled on dark cloth, pearls of freeway, the faint ember of downtown. The black beyond that swallows everything west. In the window at 13F, that second, lower wing ghosted our own for a breath. The reflection's eye did not blink. He was on his way somewhere. He had been going for a very long time, and we were the only train running. The sterile cockpit feel bled through the sealed door like cold through a window pane. Even with the PA off, you can hear a flight crew when they simmer down to numbers, flaps, speed, glide path, localizer. The auto brake selector on a 737 gives a soft, satisfying click. I didn't hear it. I felt it up my calves as the airplane pre-positioned its intentions. I always guessed 2 into Denver at night. It felt like a 2. "Cabin," the captain said over the interphone, not the PA. "We've got a stable approach, briefed for a right-side runway. Speed brakes armed, landing checklist green. If your seat persists in requests, keep the shade up. I want a quiet touchdown." "Copy, cabin ready," I said. "Shade up is honored." We captured the localizer. The descent rate eased, then tightened as the glide slope came alive. The rhythm of flap extension wrote itself into the airframe in familiar letters. 1, 5, 15. Each detent changed the engine's note, as if the airplane were clearing its throat. Through the bend of the wing, I saw the flaps extend, and the vortex generators cast tiny shadows along metal that looked soft because the light was so gentle. A child 2 rows back asked too loudly, "Are we landing?" His mother's hand covered the question with a hush that held a smile. People do that at the end. They make deals with the air. 13F chimed once, a bell without a light. I looked up the aisle and felt the creep of a shadow across the starboard ceiling, a traveling dimness that could have been a cloud crossing a moon, except we were under an indigo lid with no moon to lend excuses. It moved forward, slow, to the door, then dissolved. If you've ever seen a hospital corridor swallow a shadow around a corner, you know the sick intelligence of that motion. "Luis," I said, "you good?" "Good," he lied with charisma. "I love landing in the dark." "Priya?" "I've seen weirder in kitchens," she whispered, which is either untrue or the reason she sleeps at all. Below 5,000 feet AGL, the GPWS whispered its own lullabies in the cockpit. Glide slope, when the needle kissed low, then nothing as the first officer corrected. The engines breathed with human patience. The flaps walked past 25 to 30. That full-shouldered carry an airplane takes when it decides to be less a bullet and more a bird. The gear motors shuddered the fuselage as 3 green bulbs in the nose gear bay told their little truths. Down, locked, down. I stole a look out over 13F's shoulder into the world. The city opened like an invitation, freeways braided, the black squares of reservoirs held nothing. Far off, a string of red lights etched the spine of the front range like embers. In the glass, for a heartbeat, the old wing reappeared. lower, not parallel, as if flying a slightly wrong glide slope that wanted ours. "Caution," I breathed, to no one and everyone. "Not your runway." The profile in the reflection didn't turn. He wasn't following us. He was following his. Then the PA took a breath that wasn't ours. No chime, no click. Just that dry inhale of paper. "Meal preference for 13F. The voice paused as if deciding how to ask for something unreachable. When it continued, the consonants came through clean for the first time. Window, Denver, home. There are things you cannot give at altitude. A hug longer than the aisle allows, the truth about a delay that isn't your fault, a home to someone who has no address you can write on a baggage tag. I gripped my jump seat handles until the rubber warmed under my palms. "Shades up," I said. "Stay seated until we stop." The autopilot clicked as the first officer took the feel in his hands. You can sense that in your teeth. Human touch replacing machine. The approach lights reached up in a ladder. The runway strobes counted us down. The cabin held its breath the way a choir does before the last note lands. And then the airplane said no in a new language. The seatbelt sign surged off on off without input, a stammer the cockpit corrected so fast the public didn't notice. The exit signs glowed a shade too bright, and then settled. The FAP flashed evac command fault for a single mortal heartbeat and went clean, which is the kind of joke a jet should not make. In row 13, the oxygen mask twisted 2 degrees farther toward the glass and stilled, like a head angling for a view. If anyone screamed, I didn't hear it. If anyone prayed, they did it in replacement words, please and almost and just a little more. The mains found the runway with a firm, forgiving thud, and the spoilers leapt, and the reversers poured their fierce breath backward, and the auto brake did its tidy arithmetic. We were on Earth. We were on Earth. I've always listened for the moment when a cabin lets the landing roll become taxi. It's the second breath after applause might have started if people still did that. The engines wound forward, the reversers tucked, the spoilers laid down like quills after fright. The PA clicked, this time with the captain's hand, and delivered the sentence that unties the knot in 100 stomachs at once. "Welcome to Denver." We all smiled on script. We meant it, which is the trick. 13F stayed cold. The reflection still watched, eye open, not blinking, as if the runway could pass through him or he through it. The water cup I'd left on the tray formed a ring of beads along the lid, and then, impossible physics in small square inches, emptied itself without spilling, the water drawing back into nothing, as if it had never decided to be liquid here. "Luis," I said into our private interphone as we turned off the active, "do not touch the mask at row 13. Let it hang." "Copy," he said. "Gate?" "Gate," I said, because we were all pretending this would simply end at a door. We taxied. The yellow line under us felt like a promise you follow with your nose. The E&E Bay hummed its usual, the cabin fans did their hush, and the ovens were blessedly dead. At one intersection, the right side floodlights flicked full bright for a flash and then settled like a blink too slow to belong to mechanics. The ramp was a painting of motion, beacons, marshallers, the scissor lift ballet of catering. We rolled toward a jet bridge that looked like a throat we would enter and be translated into ground. ACARS printed one more slip in the cockpit. The captain read it and said nothing. Later, he would tell me the message was blank, save for one line in the comment field. "Seat 13F confirmed on board, window requested." He did not show us then. It felt like a pact he made with the airplane to keep certain jokes between professionals. The brakes sighed at the stop bar. The marshaller's wands crossed and opened like a magician granting permission. We chocked. The engines spooled to a quiet that isn't silence so much as the absence of thunder. The beacon clicked off. The seatbelt sign chimed away its dominion. The cabin exhaled laughter, relief, the privatist sounds of bodies deciding to belong to ground again. I stood. My knees trembled, then obeyed. Priya popped the interphone. Doors to arrival and cross-check, she said, her voice confident enough to serve at a coronation. Luis looked at me with the question you ask when the Bible ends on a comma. I nodded toward 13F. Let him watch, I said, until the door opens. We disarmed 1L and 2L. The jet bridge kissed the sill with its hollow clunk. The forward door cracked and the air came in. Dry, high, baked by a city that lives with altitude like a habit. Applause didn't happen. Phones woke. Heads turned toward escape. A wheelchair sat at the top of the bridge, empty, its footrests politely folded. A gate agent stood beside it with the particular smile of someone who has already been told there's an error and nonetheless hopes the person exists. Wheelchair for 13F? She asked reflexively into the cabin, as if the number itself had weight. Habit is its own haunting. No, I said too quickly. No passenger there. She nodded like I'd said we were out of ginger ale. Copy. She rolled the chair aside. It made the soft rattle of an idea that won't be needed tonight. Deplaning is a stream that finds its level. It makes the same sounds in every city. Good night, safe travels, have a nice connection. Passengers flowed. The girl from row 11 looked back once, curious, then didn't ask. The couple from 13DE moved past with eyes that said, "We won't tell if you don't." I smiled my signed contract of silence. When the last passenger cleared the forward galley, the cabin went to that rare, sacred hush planes get between lives. I walked to 13F and stood in the aisle with my hands behind my back. The window still held the shape of a face that was not reflection. The eye looked through the shoulder where the city lay, and in the glass, the runway lights were already memory. End of the line, I said. We kept the window up. The frost drew one last tremulous line, TH, and melted into ordinary. The oxygen mask rotated back to center and hung. A thread of condensation slid down the inside of the pane and vanished at the gasket like a tear drying mid-cheek. Thank you for choosing us, I whispered, because there's a kind of satire you earn when you work in a tube full of strangers at night. I slid the INOP tag under the seatbelt tongue again, not to hide it but to bless it with its own useless authority. From the cockpit, the captain called, "Lead, you good to open the aft for cleaning crew?" "Stand by," I said. I tucked the safety card into the pocket. The water cup I'd left had returned to lightness, empty, dry, a prop that had never held anything at all. I picked it up and crushed it gently until it made that one long sigh of plastic surrender. Then I reached for the window shade, paused, and left it up. "Now I'm good," I told the captain. "Let's bring them in." After blocks, the airplane felt like a theater after the audience leaves, props still warm, a stagehand's cough somewhere in the wings. Cleaning boarded with their vacuums like bees. A mechanic named Rojas stepped in with an AML pad and the patient smile of someone who fixes bones while the soul is out stretching its legs. "Seat 13F flagged?" he asked. "PSU moisture, oxygen door, phantom chimes," I said. "Window shade must stay up." He glanced at the FAP. "To our proximity flashed once on taxi." He didn't wait for an answer. "I'll open the panel." He set a flashlight in his teeth and popped the PSU above row 13. Inside was dry now, but the clear plastic had a faint mineral veil, as if it had been breathed on from a cold place. He wiped a fingertip trail through it and frowned. Not galley steam, not pack sweat. The oxygen mask still hung, cocked a few degrees toward the glass. He reached to reseat it. I touched his wrist. "Let it look." He didn't argue. He closed the door gently and wrote, "Mask door latched prior uncommanded drops. Monitor," in the log. The seatbelt ends lay like punctuation that no sentence wanted to complete. I slid the INOP tag back into view. The cushion held its quiet cold, the exact radius of a human choosing to occupy air. Up front, the printer clattered. The first officer walked back holding the thermal strip like a fortune. "Dispatch seat map snapshot," he said, sheepish. "A blue dot still sitting at 13F. PNR shows SSR WCHR, wheelchair request, no name. timestamp is ancient. It's embedded in the template somehow. The gate agent leaned in through 1L with that, "Did we mess up? Look." "Somehow a wheelchair order fired for 13F, she said. "I'm cancelling, sorry." "It can wait," I said, and she retreated gratefully, pushing the empty chair to the wall. The footrests angled toward our side windows as if they had their own curiosity. Cleaning did their river. At row 13, the vacuum motor stuttered and died, then restarted on its own, as if the airplane had to inhale first. The cleaner crossed herself in a language older than the airline and kept working. Rojas pulled a seat track cap and fished out the usual archaeology: candy foil, a pen lid, a boarding stub so sun-bleached it had turned into an idea. He held it up. Under the light, watermarks surfaced. Den in ghost letters. The stub had no name, no barcode, just the destination insisting itself through time. I took it like a relic. "We'll get you there," I heard myself say to no one, and felt ridiculous and useful at once. We powered down to ground service. With main power off, the cabin went shoulder dark, not spooky so much as honest. In that hush, the window at 13F bloomed a patch of breath frost on the inside that wrote and unwrote a single word: home. The H held. The rest melted like a thought mid-sentence. "Copy that," I whispered. I left the shade up. Rojas closed the PSU, initialed the AML, and shook his head like a man who's going to tell a story in a bar but won't put it in an email. "Sign here," he said. Deferred seatbelt tongue, observed nuisance PA, suspected PSU condensation, no source. I signed. My name looked too black on the white line. The captain came out, hat tucked under his arm, a man whose day had grown one ghost longer. "Close out sent," he said. "AQRs still thinks we carried 161. Maybe we did," Priya said softly, startling herself. We walked the aisles one last time. I straightened the safety card, centered the pencil, palmed the empty water cup. When I pressed my hand flat on the cushion, the cold had thinned to the memory of cold, like a long breath after tears. The call button sounded once without a light. Ding, a goodbye bell, then nothing. At the jet bridge, the empty wheelchair waited. I rolled it 3 feet forward until its footrests faced 13F through the doorway. A breeze from the ramp found the cabin and moved the INOP tag just enough to whisper, "Gate Echo," I said to Rojas, who didn't ask. "It lingers." He looked at the blank boarding stub in my hand. "Keep it," he said. "Every plane's got a saint." We turned the aircraft for an early morning departure. The sky over Denver does that pale steel trick before sunrise, and hangar birds look more like sculptures than machines. Crew change happened. The new team wore the face we had before tonight. I stayed, duty day allowed it, to hand off the irregularity report and, if I'm honest, to see how a story ends. Before boarding, I stepped into the quiet cabin alone. No power yet, only ramp light and the kind of silence you can lean on. I walked to row 13. The oxygen mask hung straight now, centered like a portrait. The cushion was room temperature, the window held only my tired face and the faint skeleton of a wing. I set the blank boarding stub on the tray, the watermark Den catching just enough light to exist. I placed the empty water cup beside it like a votive, then I rolled the wheelchair, still unclaimed, into the doorway and parked it where a person would pivot before the cabin. Superstition? Absolutely. Procedure hadn't helped last night. Ritual had. Gate power came on with its square hum. Light poured down the aisle. The FAP woke clean, all greens. No evac faults, no proximity flickers. I tapped call reset out of habit. Every halo dark. The captain of the next leg, new guy, fresh smile, stepped in. "You're the lead from the night," he said. "Got your write-up. Anything you want me to respect?" "Keep 13F blocked," I said. "Shade up for taxi and takeoff. If a chime rings with no light, don't announce. Let it pass through." He didn't smirk. Copy. Boarding started. No one tried to sit at 13F. The reservation system had obeyed the INOP flag for once. A little boy paused at the row, looked at the window the way kids look at aquariums, and whispered, "Hi." He kept walking, as if the fish didn't need him. At final, the gate agent jogged down with a printout. "Weird," she said. "Dispatch just voided a wheelchair order that was holding my closeout." It cleared itself. Seat map dot disappeared as the doors were closing. She shrugged. "Computers, computers." "Sure." I asked for 30 seconds before we buttoned up. I stood in the galley and keyed the PA, not for a speech, just for a phrase. "Final call for any remaining passengers," I said, voice low, steady. "If you were booked in 13F, your window is up. Welcome home." No chime, no whisper. Only the cabin's polite attention, then the soft realignment of people into their phones. We pushed. Beacon on. The airplane did not shiver. During taxi, the TCS stayed monastic. The coffee maker did not invent rain. At 2R, the proximity light remained a good citizen. I walked back to 13F once and found the boarding stub gone from the tray. I checked under the cushion, the pocket, the floor. Nothing. In its place, a dry ring where the cup had sat. No spill, just the memory of a circle. On the inside of the window, a smear no rag had made, resolved into a single thin line, slanted and bright as a scratch of morning, like someone had traced the edge of the Rockies with a fingertip and then left. We took off. The wing cut clean. The shade stayed up without being asked. At 10,000, I made an announcement I knew would sound like hospitality and feel like a benediction to exactly one of us. "Folks, if you're at a window, take a second to look out there. Some views only happen once." Later, in crew rest, I wrote the irregularity report the way you write a letter you'll never send. Facts threaded with the smallest possible feelings. Persistent call chimes, the 13F. PSU moisture observed, then cleared. Oxygen mask door, multiple uncommanded drops, now stable. Localized temperature anomaly resolved after arrival. ASAR's seat map mismatch cleared at next departure. Window shade position appears correlated to nuisance events. No reference to saints. No mention of frost spelling home. We don't log poetry. When we landed in Seattle, 13F behaved like furniture. The wheelchair request never returned. The MLS and ACARS forgot the blue dot. The airplane became only an airplane again, which is a kind of loss you're not supposed to admit. Since then, I keep a small ritual on the night flights. I leave one shade up during cruise on the starboard side and pour a little water I fully intend to throw away. I straighten an INOP tag, even when I don't have to. And when a call chime dings from nowhere, I answer it without looking up, because there are passengers we'll never see whose itineraries still brush ours like wings in glass. If this story gave you chills, like the video, subscribe to The Story Beyond the Impact, and share it with someone brave enough to keep the shade up at 30,000 feet.